The first wind of September came up the James like a hand through reeds, brushing the mill pond into a skin of light and sanding the rough places in my mind. I tested the new paddle against the skiff's gunwale and listened for the small talk of wood, tiny complaints, the language I trusted more than men. The Whitlow place sat high and white above the water, blinds shut against heat, but the river never shut its eyes, and neither did I when it came to remembering everything the water told me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. I was called Quillen because my mother said I came into the world with my hands ready to write. Folks laughed at names when they had the luxury. I kept mine close, like a penny warmed in the palm. By day I was the boy who coaxed the mill wheel, carried sacks, whittled pegs, and patched barrels. By night I was the man who listened to the river breathe and taught letters to myself from torn hymnals and grocery tallies that blew from the big house kitchen door. I wrote with pokeberry juice on scraps of birch, then scraped them clean with a shell and started again. Wood forgives, paper rarely comes a second time. Judge Whitlow owned the land, the river bend, and most days he claimed the weather, too. He kept his voice easy and his cane near. His eldest, Asa, returned from Richmond that summer with boots that made the porch boards talk and a mouth that curled when he smiled. Folks said college put Latin in his head and iron in his spine. They didn't say how he looked at my mother when he thought nobody saw, or how his hand rested too long on the rail above the loft ladder where she climbed. I saw. A river teaches you what to notice. If I was a secret, my letters were another. I had learned the shape of my own name from a Bible page half-burnt and saved like a coal between two boards of the smokehouse. Q like a hook, U like a wave, I 2 times impatient, L like a pole you lean against, A and N the steps back down. The taste of it in the mouth was a shore I could wade to when the days ran long. There are shores inside a man even when the land he works is not his own. On days when the millstones sang true, I could hear the rhythm clean as a psalm. On days when the upper stone ran hot, I smelled scorched corn and thought of the fields, the way they burned a boy down to muscle and ache. My craft was keeping the song even, oatmeal of sound through the day so the judge's bags didn't complain and the cook had no reason to send for lash talk from the yard. My other craft was listening for news the river carried in, names and fragments spoken in boat talk and ferry talk and whiskey talk that floated across the water to me and lodged under my ribs where no overseer could see. They called me Quill, the judge called me Boy, my mother called me Breath of Mine when her hands were in my hair after dark, checking for glass or briars. You keep your eyes like a heron's, she whispered once. Still, and seeing. The year before, they had sold Edie, my mother's sister's child, as sudden as rain. The crying in the quarters that night rubbed me raw down to bone. After that, I kept my letters sharper, my steps softer, and my ears open enough to drink the river whole. It was at the ferry where I first met the woman who would change the map in my head. She looked like a slice of winter, gray dress, gray bonnet, eyes like water under ice. Quaker folks came and went along the river, you heard tell, but this one watched the banks as if the reeds carried names written down where only she could read. When I set a cask in her ox cart, she said, "Thank thee," and her voice had a clean edge, no honey on it. She handed me a cloth-wrapped packet and said it was to be delivered to Mr. Garvey, the blacksmith 2 bends down. "Tell him Temperance sends her regard," she said. Regard, not regards. One letter makes a different kind of bridge. I carried that packet like a bird's egg, though the wheel ditch's dust tried to coat it. Mr. Garvey's shop sizzled even in sleep, a place of doors always open, of iron sweating in the mouth of flame. He was free, papers tied to his name, and he wore freedom like a weight he had learned to carry without stooping. He tapped the packet with a single finger and nodded once. He did not open it until I'd set to scraping rust from a plowshare, and even then he turned his body, shoulder to me, as if to give me privacy from the sight of whatever privacy he guarded. "You keep that mill wheel singing," he said without looking up. "But keep your ear on a different song at night. There's more than water runs in a river." I knew better than to nod big. I kept my face like millstone. "Yes, sir." He grunted. "You go on now." What I carried back from that day was not paper or iron but a new use for my craft. The same way you can feel a rough place in wood with the pad of your thumb, you can feel the rough places in a man's words if you listen right. Temperance, Mr. Garvey, the fairy talk, they were knots in a wood I had not yet planed smooth, but I knew a grain when I saw it. It ran toward a thing I could not name yet, but my palms started itching with the feel of it. Asa liked to hunt in the low woods where the river turns lazy. He liked to shoot when the light was wrong for shooting, just to show light who made the rules. He'd throw his kills in the skiff and kick them with his boot to see if I flinched at the way ribs make sound. "You got good hands," he said once, watching me splice a new length of rope. "Judge says you got the touch for wood." Wood don't talk back. Wish I had that luck. He smiled like a saw. Men do. His eyes were my eyes, but cut with a lighter blade. We shared a father's blood in the way a roof shares rain, some leaks, some stains, some places you can hide under when it comes down, but most nights you still get wet. I kept that fact folded small where only my ribs could feel it. A secret can be a bone, you put weight on it, and it holds you. Or it breaks you. You don't know which until the day comes. The day came the way summer ends, slow until sudden. We were mending the sluice boards where the mill race left its comb marks on the oak. Asa was standing where the spray could not reach his boots. "Judge is thinking to sell a parcel," he said, as if he were talking about fence posts. "Corn's sweet, but coin's sweeter." His eyes slid to the quarters past the sycamore. He let the sentence sit there, like a snake coiling in sun. My hands never stopped working the leather gasket into the notch. But inside, everything froze as if the wheel had bit a nail. "A parcel," I said. I put the syllables down the way you set a box in a wagon, careful not to jolt it. "Which parcel?" He toyed with the brass button on his jacket. "Depends on who looks strong enough to fetch a price and weak enough to not be missed." He smiled at the river. "Maybe that little boy with the dog. Folks pay more for young. They don't fight as long." He sighed, a fancy kind of sigh that might have been learned from a book. "We do what we must for the land." The boy with the dog was Sutter, all bones and eyes, and he slept in a pallet near ours, his dog a tangle of ribs under the pallet itself most nights. Sutter believed every hand on the place was kin to him. That kind of belief is a weather vane, it points where the wind comes from, not where it goes. My mother had taught me over and over that love is a thing you hold like a low candle, close enough to heat your face, low enough not to show in a window. That night I went to the smokehouse and put my hand on the Bible ash between the boards. The coal of it still lived in me. My letters felt like teeth, purpose in them, hunger in them. I found an empty flour sack in the kitchen, cut it low and long, and stitched it back with wax thread I'd saved from a barrel hoop repair. A bag like that could ride under a shirt and hold what might need hiding. The pokeberries were ripe along the fence. I crushed a handful in my palm, sticky as blood, and wrote on birch bark, "Sutter dog. Sell. Before harvest moon." The letters were ugly. Ugly letters do the same work as pretty ones when the message is true. I slid the bark into the bag and wore it home on my chest, skin burning where juice leaked through. In the quarters, my mother looked at me the way the river looks at a far bank before it decides how much land to steal this season. "What you carrying, Quill?" she asked softly. "Wait," I said. "Give me a day and I can say what kind." She set her hand on my cheek and did not ask more. She had been sold once, long ago, and sold back again after a man died and a ledger looked different between two sons. I learned early that silence is a skill you sharpen. But there's a silence that's a bridge between two people. We had that kind. The next day I set a broken paddle on the workbench and made a show of splitting a new blade. When Asa came down to the shed, I reached for a file and let it clatter to the floor. In stooping, I slid my bark slip under a sailcloth scrap here, a pocket flap there, until it sat where Asa couldn't help finding it when he looked for his tobacco pouch. I kept my breath steady and my hands careless. The mill wheel kept singing. When he found it, he laughed before he read it all. The laugh turned slow and then stopped. I saw the corner of his mouth move in a direction it didn't know well. "Who wrote this?" He turned the bark over as if writing might have a tail. I put a bit between my teeth to make the paddle's leading edge clean. "What is it?" I asked, too busy to be curious. "Nothing," he said, and tucked the bark into his boot like a man hiding flint. "Just boys riding where they shouldn't." He left, but his smell stayed, the cologne from Richmond, too sharp for this air, and the iron of a man considering something harder than he is. That evening he took a horse and went up the ridge path that looks down over the ferry crossing near Temperance's Landing. I watched from the mill's shadow, the wheel turning between us like a clock that belonged to someone else. I did not follow. Not then. You don't plane wood against its grain, you wait until you know which way it wants to lie. 2 nights later, the judge called for his cane after supper, and the quarters learned the new song The Lash writes on skin. It was not Sutter they had pulled from the pallet. It was his mother, Lorna, thin as shade and twice as quiet, who had begged the kitchen for broth and been told to bring a sack of kindling in repayment. She had stopped to pet the dog. The judge said she had dawdled. For dawdling he wrote a paragraph on her back in the language a man learns when he believes there is no law above his name. I stood by, hands by my sides, face like stone. Inside my chest, letters ran together until they made a different kind of rope. After, I took a strip of linen I had saved and laid it across her shoulders where the skin rose hot. My mother's hands shook but worked sure with salve, my hands poured cool well water, slow as prayer. Lorna did not make a sound. Sutter pressed his face into the dog's neck and learned a lesson boys should never have to learn, which sounds you must swallow to keep the sky from breaking. It is one thing to survive. It is another to decide that survival is not the only name a life can take. In the black noon that comes after a night like that, I walked to the river and put my feet in. The mud accepted me without question. The moon ran like a coin on the water, and I imagined picking it up and paying for a different day with it. I set a name to the dark, Temperance. Then another, Garvey. Then a third, Quillen. I wrote them with my toe in the silt and let the current take them down until they blurred. When I pulled my feet from the water, I knew the grain of the wood. It ran toward a thing called a way. It begins small, like making a peg fit a hole that was not bored true. I started with the chain of the mill gate. A quiet link can hold a loud door. I wore my file down to a sliver rounding the pin so it would slip when a hard hand pulled on the handle the wrong way. I palmed the pin and turned it while men talked of weather. When the judge yanked the gate in a mood a day later, the chain let go like a sigh and the gate drifted. We hauled it back with ropes, grunting, cursing. "Boy," the judge shouted at me. "What in hell?" The pin was back before anyone looked, the link even and smooth as a freeman's lie. I shrugged. "Iron gets tired in the heat, sir." He threw up his hand and called me a fool. It is useful to be thought a fool when you are writing a careful sentence in a book you dare not show. I wrote other sentences. I re-roped the ferry post with a splice that would hold fast for any sober hand and come loose in one pull for me if I had to launch after dark. I planted 3 willow switches at the bend upriver where the oxbow thickens, one cut high, one at knee height, one low to the waterline, a code for nights to come. And I began meeting Mr. Garvey in the way men meet when they cannot meet. I would bring a plowshare for sharpening, lay it by, and he would place on top of it a folded scrap of brown paper, hammer scales stuck to it like fish scales. Inside, the brown paper carried small, hard words, 2 nights. Lantern 1. Temperance knows. In daylight, Asa spoke like weather, moving across the porch and fields without anyone believing they could stop him. But at night I began to understand what weather listens to. He drank. He went down to the landing alone to throw bottles and break the water with the darkness of his laugh. Once, he fired at the moon for the sin of shining. The bullet skipped the water and bit the ferry post. I fixed the post at dawn and mumbled to it like a man to a dog, promising it we were learning a new trick. When a house breathes, you can hear it sleep once you know how the boards complain and where mice hold their meetings. The Whitlow house never slept right after Asa came home. Doors moved in their frames like they wanted to be elsewhere. The kitchen women set loaves to rise and then tore the loaves into lumps to start again, hands shaking at nothing anyone else could see. My mother kept her eyes on her work and her work between her and any man's idea of her. At night she sat with me under the smokehouse eaves and taught me songs without singing them, humming the bones of them until the flesh of words laid itself down on those bones by itself in my mind. "You put your letters there," she whispered, tapping my temple. "But keep your fire here." She put her palm on my chest. "A man can live an entire life on a single coal if he guards it right." The harvest moon rose round as a millstone. "Now," said the brown paper I found under the plowshare that afternoon. "Now," said the river by lifting its skin into small waves when the wind came from the east. "Now," said Sutter's dog by laying its head on my shoe and refusing to move until I set my hand on its skull and gave it a wordless promise I had no right to make and no right to keep to myself. I took the skiff down at dusk and set the oars lightly, letting the current do its own share of the rowing. The landing across, the Quaker Landing, was a leaf shadow in moonlight. I counted my breaths. 8 to the Willow. 6 past the Snag. 4 to the shoal where the turtles stack in spring. When I pulled alongside the old ferry post, I tied a half knot as if unsure of my hand. Then I undid it with the touch I had taught it and let the skiff drift like a thought you pretend you didn't think. Temperance stood at the far edge of the landing like a mistake she was willing to make twice if it meant someone else got free of a first mistake. She lifted her lantern once and set it on a crate. No words. A man in a wide-brim hat, shadow eating his face, stood a little back. Mr. Garvey's shape, iron in the way he held his shoulders. I did not go to them. I kept to my shore. Leaving has steps. You don't hop from a roof to another roof unless you know the lane. You test joists. You test your knees. You test your heart if you can bear the answer. I turned back with the current and let the skiff nose the Whitlow Landing as if nothing in me had moved. Asa was there, bottle in his hand like a bell you ring to call trouble to supper. "You row like an old woman," he said. "Judge wants his whiskey fetched from the storehouse. Bring a lamp." The storehouse was cool as the inside of a cave. The smell of corn and old cloth lived there. Asa liked to take his time choosing whiskey as if each barrel had a personality. He teased the taps like a flirt. "You ever think about leaving, Quill?" he asked, cutting his eyes at me. He liked to make my name small when he said it, nicknaming a thing that did not belong to him. "I think about work," I said. "Work's what I have charge of." He chuckled. "You and me got charge of the same thing," he said. He put the brass dipper to his mouth and tipped it. "We are the judge's hands. You, the left. Me, the right." He held the dipper out like an offering. "Drink." I put my palm up, polite. "No, sir." He smiled. "You think you better than me?" I looked at the barrels as if they were the sky and I was making a study of constellations. "I think I'm me," I said. "That's work enough." He laughed for real then, the sound quick and young, and it made him look like the boy he had not been allowed to be. It is a terrible thing to see what a man could have been when you know what he is. "Come on, then," he said. "Judge is thirsty." We carried the jug between us, a careful dance of slosh and step. When we set it down by the porch, the judge nodded as if we had returned from war. "Boy," he said to me without looking, "tomorrow you take Asa to Drury's Bluff to see about that skiff you've been asking after. If it's fit, we'll buy it. The river's got work to do this fall." "Yes, sir," I said. My heart beat like a rabbit's in a field with hawks above, but I did not let my voice tell. That night, I drew with my finger on the dirt behind the quarters, a map of the bend, the ferry post, the willow marks, the shoal that looks like a sleeping ox. Sutter watched with the dog under his chin. My mother stood behind me, her hand on my shoulder, not pressing, only claiming the ground of me. Lorna lay turned on her side, breathing the shallow way a person breathes when the skin of their back refuses to bear more. I did not tell them the plan. Plans spoken have a way of sprouting ears and legs of their own and walking to the big house. Instead, I taught Sutter how to feel where the current pulled hardest and where it slackened. I taught him how to tuck his trail under a water smell, onions crushed in the palm, or mud on the soles. "You ain't a fox," I whispered, "but you can borrow a fox's sense when you need it." He nodded, wide eyes pulling everything inside them like the river pulls pine needles. At dawn, Asa and I pushed off. The skiff he wanted was tied under an elm at a yard that smelled of tar and old rope. I took the measure of her with my hands, ribs quick and bridge true. She would ride light if you kept from loading your fear into her. The man asked too high a price, as men do when a whitlow stands on their shore. Asa talked him down with a knife-edge smile. Men like to be cut a little, he whispered to me afterward, pleased with himself. It makes them believe they lost by choice. He tossed me the painter and we shoved into the channel. The day went on like days do when men think they are in charge of the hours. We passed a raft of logs coming down from the west, the men on it brown to the color of the wood they rode. We nodded to a flatboat heavy with flour sacks. I read the signs I always read, the tug of wind in my left ear meaning a storm 2 days off, the single heron standing where 3 usually nested, meaning a fox had made free in the reeds. But I read other signs, too, temperance on the far shore at noon, hanging cloth as if that was what her hands were made for, Mr. Garvey at the blacksmith's yard with his hat tipped back farther than he liked, pretending he could not feel the sun hauling sweat out of him. All of us pretending easy, the way a man whistles when he is walking into a dark barn. Race me, Asa said after a long stretch of quiet water. He set his jaw and dug the oars in, strong, showing off for the wind. I let him surge ahead and then settled into the rhythm I trusted, the one made of breath and count and the small adjustments no one sees. I did not catch him. It would have been a kind of lie to win a thing like that. But I did not lose so much he could be proud of me losing, either. When we tied up, his hair stuck to his forehead and something about him looked younger again. You row like a man who thinks, he said. Thinking makes a man slow. Sometimes slow saves, I said. He snorted, but he didn't argue. It was near evening when we made the last bend home. The mill wheel sang. The house sat above the light like a lesson that thinks itself a truth. I got out first and steadied the skiff. When his boot hit the planks, the knot I had laid on the painter 2 nights before slid like water. The skiff eased away an inch, then another. He cursed and hopped, catching his balance with the speed of a boy. He laughed and called me names for fun. I laughed back. The painter came easy back into my hand. All of it a practice, the way a carpenter planes a scrap before he puts the blade to the door he will fit. That night, the brown paper under the plowshare said one word only, midnight. I put my ear to the earth at dusk. The river sounded like a page being turned. I stood and set a small lamp where it could be seen from Temperance's Landing and no place else. Then I doused it and put the wick in my pocket. I breathed in until my ribs hurt and let the breath out slow. If a man could breathe the way a letter is written, careful line, then a straight stroke with the whole hand, maybe he could change his name without ever saying it out loud. When the house lights guttered low and the quarters fell to their whisper sleep, I moved. Sutter's dog followed me as far as the willow and then, as if remembering some promise I had made for him, lay down without a sound. I put one foot in the skiff and then the other. The painter lay in my left palm, the oar handles under my right. The current welcomed me like a cousin you haven't seen in 20 years and still remembers your face. Asa was on the porch, a dark edge against the darker house. Were you rowing, boy? He called softly, mock-friendly. Checking the sluice, I lied with a voice that tried on a new coat and hoped it fit. He stood. I'll come. A thing done right is a thing overseen. He took the steps 2 at a time and dropped into the skiff like a man who believes boats exist to hold him. The skiff bobbed and then steadied, obedient. I set the oars. The night smelled of wet wood and a little blood, not human, river blood, fish and turtle and rot the way the Lord meant things to return to the water. We slid off into the channel. Behind us the landing pulled away as gently as a mother pulling a blanket up to a child's chin. The moon laid a road before us. I counted, quiet, the way I always count. 8 to the willow. 6 to the snag. 4 to the shoal. My hands did what they knew. My mind did the other work, keeping the letters steady in their places so the sentence would read the way I had written it. Judge says we'll sell a parcel after Sunday, Asa said into the water. You hear that? He asked my counsel. He tapped the plank with his boot heel. I said we trim what don't fatten. I felt the oars wanting to turn, like a horse that knows the stable is near and pulls for it. I held them to the line. Sunday soon, I said. Soon enough, he said. You know, Quill, if you weren't what you are, you'd be something. He laughed. You are something, I suppose. A tool is a thing. We passed the willow. I breathed once in and out, slow, marking the breath with a word I did not say, now. The snag reached its black finger toward us. I lifted the oars clean and set them silent. We floated. The shoal waited ahead, shallow enough to stand if a man had to, deep enough to swallow a sound. On the far shore a lantern slid along the reeds like a star that had fallen and decided to make itself useful. I angled the skiff with my knee against the gunwale. The current took us in, soft as a hand on a fevered brow. Asa leaned to look for the sluice chain and saw only night looking back. You sure you know where you're going? He asked. Yes, I said, and the word felt like the first real sentence I had ever spoken. The lantern on the far shore lifted once and went still. I did not raise my hand. I kept mine on the oars and let the skiff right the rest of the line. The reeds parted. A shape stepped forward from the black, Temperance's winter gray bonnet, the brim cutting the moon. Beside her, the wide brim shadow. Behind them the dark like a room with many doors you can't see until you stand in it. I slid the skiff another yard. The painter hung limply from my left hand, the knot I had made earlier a question only I knew the answer to. Asa shifted, his boots scraping plank. What in, he began, and I said softly, almost kind, hush, because sometimes mercy is the only sharp thing you can afford to use. The river held its breath. The lantern light tested the edges of Asa's face and found the boy still hiding there. I thought of Sutter's dog, of Lorna's back, of my mother's hand on my chest. I thought of the letter half burnt between smokehouse boards and the way a man makes his own page sometimes out of night and wool and the dumbwood of a skiff. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Skiff. Tilted to my breath and the hush I asked of it. The painter lay like a sleeping snake across my palm. I turned the skiff on a whisper of oar and felt the current shoulder us toward the reeds where the gray bonnet hovered like a winter moon. Quillin, Temperance said, hardly moving her mouth. Her lantern hung low, a small star doing a big job. The hour we spoke of. Asa shifted. I could feel his jaw change shape in the dark. Who is that? He asked, his voice wrapped in velvet, the kind men use to hide knives. What have you done? What I must, I answered, and my hands didn't shake. Everything I had ever filed, mended, carved, trued, every plank I'd made fit taught my fingers what to do when the world itself needed squaring. The skiff kissed the reeds. A second lantern, hooded, opened like an eye. Mr. Garvey's shape gathered from the shadows. He did not look at me. He watched Asa the way a man watches a forge he has let burn too hot. Evening, Asa said, cool as water in a stone jug. Do you know my father? Judge Whitlow. I can speak for him. Tonight thee will speak for thyself, Temperance replied. The Quaker these sounded to my ear like boards fitted tight, plain, sure, no paint to hide what the wood is. Put the oars down, friend Quillin. I laid them across the thwarts and lifted the painter. One furl, two. My thumb teased the knot I'd taught to come loose in a breath. Asa leaned to snatch for the line. He grabbed my wrist instead, fast, strong, blood of mine and none of mine. His fingers dug like a man catching a falling roof beam. No, he hissed. No, no. Take his shoulder, Mr. Garvey said, not to me. Reeds moved. Hands came from night. Asa jerked, struck, hit air, hit bone, hit air again. Someone's breath left with a sound like a bellows kicked. I didn't move. I kept my wrist soft so he would think he had its strength. When the painter slid, my palm felt it go the way a man feels a fever break in a child he loves enough to sit with through the shaking. The skiff drifted 2 handspans from the landing. 2 handspans are a bridge if a man decides. Mr. Garvey decided for him. He put one knee in the boat, took Ace's arm a second time, and turned that arm the way a smith turns iron that has learned too much of its own stubbornness in the fire. Asa breathed a sound I had never heard from him. Not pain alone. Surprise. Men like him don't often make friends with surprise. Easy, I said, and the word came out not to him but to the night itself, asking it to hold. He twisted, the skiff rocked, the moon ran to the right and then left along the plank, the river took all our names in its mouth and tasted them. Then Mr. Garvey had both Ace's wrists cinched in a leather loop and Temperance's lantern came down, quick as a hand blessing a child. A third man rose from the reeds behind them, broad, quiet, face set like a door no one knocks before they open. He passed a length of rag to Garvey, and they drew it over Ace's mouth the way one draws a shade, not rough, not gentle, necessary. Asa bucked. The skiff hissed against the reeds. I put my palm to his chest and felt the lift of his heart under bone the same as mine. For a beat, I saw the boy in him again, the boy a book might have saved if a different sentence had been written for us both long ago. Then the picture passed. The world returns to its grain after a nod if you plain steady. He thrashed until the leather learned him. Then he lay breathing through his nose, eyes like two pieces of onyx laid in a mask. He found my face in the dark and held it. We looked at each other, brothers as roofs share rain. The river carried our breath to each other and back. Bring him, Temperance said. No one raised a voice. No one asked the night to carry more than it could. We shifted our weight until the skiff took him. Mr. Garvey's knee never left the plank, he moved like a man who has mended wagons in a flood, centering, steady, persuading wood that thinks it will not float that it can. Asa came into the boat because men stronger than his intentions had decided he would. When he was down, quiet, leather snugged and gag sure, Garvey bound his ankles, then looped a second strap through and around the thwart so he could not drown if we were upset. Care like that is not kindness, not alone. It's a sentence with a lot of clauses, and each clause has work to do. We pushed off. Temperance stepped into the stern without haste. The third man, who I would learn later was called Justice, and had earned it, melted back into the reeds and was gone, to do other work this river needed. The lantern had came down and the light turned small again. The dark accepted our little boat as if it had been waiting a long time to. Why? Ace's eyes asked me. He asked with the whole of his face, pride beaten into quiet by surprise and rope. I owed him an answer even if my mouth gave none. Because you hurt what is mine. Because you were building a gallows for a boy who thinks every hand is kin. Because my mother's breath should not have to carry your father's name as a weight between ribs and sleep. Because I will write a different line. I didn't speak. Temperance did. Friend, thee is in no mortal danger as long as thee breathes steady and listens, she said, calm as a kitchen table. Thee has power thee has not earned. Tonight thee will feel the country from underneath, and in the feeling thee will buy with thy father's coin the papers that free those whom thee calls parcel. If thee refuses, the river knows places to hold a man where searchers cannot find him in a week and, when they do, nothing on his face to tell he was ever loved. Asa made a sound into the rag. Anger, not fear yet. I rowed. Mr. Garvey watched our wake, reading it like a man reading sweat beating on iron, judging heat and risk. The current laid its hand on our backs and helped. We did not go to the Quaker landing. We turned along the oxbow, slid past the snag that looks like a hand pointing the wrong way, and entered a cut I had sounded a dozen times with a pole and never told a soul about. The water there smelled old, oak leaf and turtle, a cellar smell the sun forgot. Catfish sang against the hull, small knocks, like a child practicing on a door before learning to ask to come in. Justice met us where the cut gives back to the main flow. He walked the mud like a man born to it and caught the bow without a splash. East bank is clean, he said. Ridge path watched by two boys who don't know they're watching. He handed Temperance a folded paper. First letter already traveling. She opened it toward the lantern without lifting the shade more than a finger's width. Her face did not change as her eyes moved. Good, she said. Motion makes truth for men who trust only what they can touch. Her calm pulled my heart into a slower stride. There is a bravery that shouts. There is another that sets bread on a table and asks a man to wash his hands. We brought Asa through the low willow country to a shed no one owning a map would put on that map. Oak posts cut from stormfall, a roof from a barn someone swore had blown away last winter, clay packed into gaps by hands that had learned keep heat and keep secrets at the same time. Inside, a table, ink, a quill, a lamp turned down to a whisper of light, and a man in a black coat whose collar looked like the edge on a plow. "Evening, friends," the man said. His voice had a city in it somewhere. "Tonight's testimony must be plain. The clock we keep is short." He nodded to Asa, now seated and bound to the chair with straps that would not shame a horse. "Remove the gag." "Not the hands." Garvey lifted the rag. Asa's first breath came out like a laugh that had lost its place in a conversation. He swallowed. He shook his head once as if to fling hair from his eyes and met the black-coated man with the look he gave dogs who misbehaved. "Do you know who I am?" The man dipped the quill, rapped the nib twice on the glass rim, and did not look up. "Thy name is Asa Whitlow, son of Edward Whitlow, called Judge. Thy father sits on 3 committees, 2 boards, and a lot of men. He eats with both hands and sleeps with both eyes. He has signed bills of sale for human bodies under candles he calls Christian. He will sign something else tonight." Asa's lip curled. "You people." Temperance touched the table. The smallest tap, brittle as a moth's wing. It silenced him better than a rope. The man wrote on the topmost paper in a neat, stubborn hand. "Affidavit. I, Asa Whitlow, of James County, Commonwealth of Virginia, under no duress save that of truth and conscience, do herein attest to the particulars following. That Edward Whitlow, my father, has determined to sell persons named Lorna and Sutter, child of same, within the week following the Sabbath next. That he has directed the breaking of laws of the Commonwealth by transport of persons after dark without pass, to avoid notice, for sake of price. That he has knowledge of violence done and sanctioned by his house upon the bodies named and others unnamed, particulars of which I am witness. That in exchange for the safe return of my person, he will sign manumission for 4 souls of my naming and grant passes to the North Starwood Road for no fewer than 7 more. The black-coated man blew on the ink and slid the paper toward Asa. "Read," he said. Asa laughed without sound. "You are mad," he said, "and to me, and you. You think this will hold the weight of a day?" I said nothing. Temperance did not blink. Garvey lifted a second paper already folded, its seal unpressed. "This goes north by 3 hands before dawn," he said. "If thy father will not buy what mercy costs, this will run faster than his horse to presses that never sleep." Asa looked at the lamp, at the ink, at the little shed that smelled of clay and cold smoke. He looked at my hands where they rested on the table edge, small nicks white against brown where knives and chisels had taught me. He searched for a place in the room that belonged to him by right. Finding none, he looked at me the way a man looks at a door that will not open though it is his own house and his key. "You are," he began. He shut his mouth. "Quillen. You are my," another shut. He could not say the word. I could. "Brother," I said, and the word did not forgive anything as it stood there between us like a length of timber, load-bearing and unsanded. "I am that by your father's deed. I am not yours by your choice." He lifted his chin. "If I sign, I betray him." Temperance's voice was the same voice she would use to count loaves. "If thee signs, thee betrays a lie. If thee refuses, thee betrays thine own soul." Garvey laid a third paper down. "Bill of sale / manumission draft. Know all men by these presents that I, Edward Whitlow, do hereby manumit and forever set free the following persons." Blank spaces waited like plates at a table where hungry folks watched the door. I leaned forward. "Here are the names," I said, and I spoke them into the room as if I were carving them on hickory with a blade that had learned patience. "My mother, Dinah. Lorna. Sutter. Garvey's apprentice, Moses. And 7 passes for those who will not wait to be purchased with ink." Ace's eyes flickered at the first name as if a moth had flown too near to the wick. He looked at the door and found it still closed. He looked at the leather and found it still tight. He looked at the roof, old boards, a knot the size of a baby's skull, a sapline curved like a signature nature had written and no court could read. "If I sign," he said again, as if the word itself might split into a new thing if he worried it enough. "If I sign, he will never forgive." Garvey said, plain, "Forgive is not what thee needs." The black-coated man turned the paper and set the quill on it, the feather pointing toward Ace's heart. "Place thy hand," he said. A long moment. The kind that would be an hour if time obeyed justice. Then Asa nodded once, the smallest bow I had ever seen him give to anything, and moved his bound wrists as far forward as the straps let him. Garvey eased one hand loose, just enough. The quill came to his fingers. He put the nib to the line as if he were pricking his own skin. The ink took. He wrote his name. Again, the black coat said, and his finger tapped the affidavit. Asa wrote the letters as a man writes with a pebble in his shoe. The sound of it, the scratch, was like a cricket under a floorboard, nagging, insistent, alive. When it was done, he pushed the quill away and stared at what the ink said about him and his father and us. Then he looked at me with a kind of nakedness I had not thought he owned. "Quillen," he whispered. "My name, not cut, not small. What will you do now?" "Build," I said. "And break. In that order as long as I can." We moved like hive folk after that, each to his task with no more speech than work needs when it is honest. Garvey and Justice took the papers, sealed, split between them, 2 different routes to the same dawn, one to a printer's hand across the line, one to a hand already inside the judge's circle, paid with the coin Asa had once believed could buy any silence. Temperance and I walked the ridge path by old habit we did not own, her skirt gathered above mud, me with a pole across my shoulders that looked like a yoke and felt like a staff. In the quarters, the world held its breath. The dog thumped its tail once against the dirt, as if to say a man was part of its pack and the night should know. My mother sat with her hands open on her lap, as if she had set something down that was heavy and might yet be asked for again. "Soon," I said to her, and to Lorna who lay on her side, and to Sutter whose eyes were already north. "Not all. But 4 with ink. 7 with road. The rest," I looked at the sky through the window hole where we watched seasons change and counted winter by how fat the stars seemed. "The rest will be a bigger tool." My mother did not ask what price I had paid. She traced my jaw with one finger and found the boy there and the man there and did not try to keep either. "You wrote it," she said. "You held the coal." Before sun, the house woke for church as it always did when the judge took his righteousness out among neighbors to air it. He wore a coat with a button like a coin. Asa did not sit beside him. The judge asked 2 men where his son had gone as if the question were about a horse. 2 men said they had not seen. I heard the question and the answers from the mill road, where I stood adjusting a pin that did not require adjustment. The judge's cane clicked once on the porch like a tongue against a disapproving tooth. He told the driver to bring the barouche. He found Asa at noon. Not by his own power. By the power of a boy who watched the wrong place and then the right one, twice, and thought to ask a question nobody had taught him not to ask. A boy with hands like mine would have later, nodded already, quick already. The judge rode out with 4 men and a rope. He rode back with 3 and a son and a face like milk left in the sun. He sent a rider before supper to town. He sent another to Richmond before the lamps were trimmed. He sent a third, late, after the house had learned the shape of his rage and set plates accordingly. None of that stopped paper from being paper when ink has found it. By morning, a man in a brick building far from the river set type that made us sound like crickets multiplied by 1,000. By afternoon, a bundle of sheets rode a wagon beyond the line with names on it that did not used to live on paper and now did. At dusk, the judge came to the quarters with a ledger and a Bible. He stood where we stood to get air when summer wore us to bone and called the names. He read the manumission he had written with a face like stone and signed with a hand that did not tremble, because pride is as steady as prayer when it has practiced enough, and then he signed the passes with the same hand, each one a little coffin he nailed for himself without knowing. He did not look at me until the last pass was signed. Then he did, and it was like looking in a mirror where your face is older and less kind. "Boy," he said. "Whose idea?" The air between us was as thin as paper. "Mine," I said. "And his?" I nodded toward his son. Asa's mouth went to say brother. It did not find the road to the word. The judge closed the ledger. "Get off my land," he told the 4 free by his own pen sentence. By dawn. The 7 with passes, by dark. The rest, his cane touched the dirt. The rest remember. We remembered. We remember still. Garvey's apprentice wept into his apron and laughed at the same time. Lorna held Sutter to her with a sound that was not any human word I know and had more meaning in it than all the judge's books. My mother stood very straight and put her hand on the wall she had leaned against in 100 midnights, and then she took that hand away and did not look back at the print it left in dust. We walked. Not all at once. In streams. Folks like us know how to look like water when we have to, many, and one, visible, and not. Garvey had men posted with onions and mud and jars of bacon grease to rub on feet so dogs read the road like a poem in a language they never learned to speak. Temperance set bread at a fence post that had no fence attached and a cup turned upside down to mean turn here when the moon sits like a chip taken from a plate. Justice rode ahead and back, wide as a hawk circle. We took the small roads the judge thought no one used and the deer used every day. I did not go. I watched my mother step onto a track I had walked 100 times in my head and only twice with my feet. She looked at me the way the river looks at a far bank it has decided to reach without flood if it can. "You come when your work says to," she said. "My work says stay," I answered, and we both heard the ache in it and respected it the way you respect a scar. She kissed my brow. "Write me a letter I cannot lose, here." She laid my hand on her chest and held it there with both of hers as if my fingers were a leaf and her ribs were the book. "I will read it walking." They went under gray cloud that held rain for another day to keep the dogs tired. I stood there until the last back had gone small. Then I went to the mill and took the pin from the gate and filed it to a different honesty. The wheel sang. Its song was new. Not happier. Truer. The judge learned what paper does to men who have pretended the world is only what a cane can touch. He learned it from a neighbor who brought a folded sheet and a face trying not to grin. He learned it from a man in a city coat who said libel suits are slow, sir, in a voice that had already spent coin he did not have. He learned it from a boy in his own yard who read and would not stop reading aloud until a hand took the paper away. He called Asa to the porch. "I expected a son," he said, voice low enough for the planks to hear and no one else if we had not all learned to make air into wire the year they sold Edie. "I find a woman's trick." "I expected a father," Asa said, surprising me with how even it came out, "and I found a buyer of souls." The cane clicked. "You are soft." "I am softer than you," Asa answered. "So is the Lord, and I will not be ashamed of that." I did not cheer him. I did not forgive him. My hands kept moving, planing a rib for a skiff that would, God willing, carry more names than the bill of sale could hold. But I heard him. The first day of a man's life sometimes comes late. It rarely comes easy. He bled for it in looks, in small humiliations men of his set give each other when they smell a weak place and decide not to call it healing. Men came with dogs the second night, late, after a bottle taught them bravery. They came to the quarters, into the sheds and to the river. They found things arranged to waste their time. Flower trails in 3 directions. A child shoe tied to a catfish line. A rope hung low where a drunk man will put his foot and fall without knowing why the ground came up so fast to meet him. They cursed. They swore they would set fire to what they could not find. I had been waiting for fire. The mill sits with its back to the river and its face to the corn. Fire eats face quickest. Men with torches came yawing up the yard like boats rowed by boys. I opened the floodgate with a turn I had taught the chain to make for me and no one else, and water leaped under the wheel like a teen let loose from a load. The spray took flame the way a woman takes a baby from a fool, firm, not cruel. Torches hissed. One went out. 2 more sputtered. Men cursed. I shut the gate and opened it again and then again until the torches forgot they were brave. Mr. Garvey stood in the road with his arms crossed and a black smile on. He did not raise a fist. Sometimes keeping a hand down is more of a shout than waving it high. That night did not end with righteousness. Few do. A man threw a torch anyway and it caught at the mill roof edge where the pitch had soaked deep in spring. We climbed. We patted fire like a rabid dog, and it bit. By dawn my right palm was a map of red roads and my hair smoked. But the roof stayed on. The wheel sang. The corn waited. We stood in the muddy yard smelling like a workday and a funeral had a child. The judge walked out with the ledger again. He looked at our burned shirts and my blistered hand and Garvey's grin and Ace's eyes and the river like a brother that had finally said no. He opened the ledger and then shut it. Enough, he said. To no one. To everyone. Enough. He returned to the house that believed him because houses have to. There are reckonings that can be seen, counted, named. A sack of coin emptied to pay men to read him a page they said he could ignore. A boy riding north with his mother and dropping a shoe in a ditch because he had learned how to leave a trace that meant nothing to dogs and everything to men who loved him. A woman stepping off a wagon into a city where no one knew the shape of her back before it healed and finding a way to stand in a line and own her breath in a room with glass. There are reckonings no one but the men in them feel. Ace awoke before first cockcrow for months and sat on the porch without a bottle. He cut himself shaving and did not curse. He told a field hand to rest in the shade at noon and took the trouble that came behind that instruction into his own chest and held it there instead of throwing it like a brick. He walked to the mill and stood in the spray where his boots would not be comfortable. He put his palm on the wheel housing and listened to the song I had kept even when it burned me. He did not apologize. There are days when the word is not big enough. He learned to carry that, too. The 7 with passes made it as far as the line and then split. 2 to a river farther north where they changed their names to sound like cities and kept those names like coats, warm, not perfect fits, mended often. 3 to a foundry where iron learned their handprints and did not forget. 2 to a farm run by a woman who cut bread with a knife too dull and still made slices even, Temperance's cousin. My mother wrote to me once by mouth carried in a safe man's ear. Tell him I stand in a window and look at my own choice, she said, and I took the sentence and put it where I keep fire. Lorna and Sutter made a life that had room for a dog and for nights where no one cried and for a door that could stay open on a summer rain without fear a man would come through it with a ledger and a rope. Sutter learned letters from a preacher's daughter who liked to sit in the shade and thought the Lord must surely want boys to read in the heat because he made paper light. He wrote me a note on a scrap of old store bill that said, "Dear Quill. Water sounds different here but I think it says the same things." We kept working the river. I became a man. Men brought plans to the way they bring a broken tool to a table where the light is good. We made routes where there had been only wishes. We learned to sink a skiff with stones so it would sleep on the riverbed like a turtle if eyes were watching, and we learned to call it up with a rope when the dark turned its back. We mapped every willow's mood out to 4 bends. We taught boys to be quiet the way you teach them to tie knots, once slow, twice laughing, 3rd time with their eyes closed. The judge died in a chair with both boots on one spring when the last frost came unexpected and the peach buds lost their courage. Men said he went quick. Paper said he went with no more property than a good suit and a few pieces of land that did not sing like they used to. A court argued about as well as if arguing were a way to set corn. Asa sat under a tree while they did and looked at his hands. When the court was done, he had less than he had grown to think was air. He gave a field to a church that would bury free men when other ground would not. He signed a line that set 3 more names loose by a door the law kept half shut and looked no one in the eye while he did it. We are what we practice. He practiced late. Late is not the same as never. The war that men had been tasting in their mouths a long time came down the road at last. Blue and gray made rivers of boys. the mill turned for whoever brought corn and called me sir. I hid who I hid and passed who I passed and took no coin and took all kinds. I watched a boy in blue, his face as smooth as bark inside a tree, drink from his hat at the river and let him sleep leaning on my door. I watched a man in gray walk alone across a field where he had been brave all morning and would be dead by evening, and kindled no hate in my belly that would have been easy to feed because I needed the space in that belly for bread I would bake after. When it ended, papers did a worse job than men like to think and a better job than men who bled can bear to admit. We kept making routes, only now we wrote them bigger because we could and because a new set of men were already learning old habits with fresh excuses. I married a woman who could lift a sack of corn like a psalm and make of it something that smelled like mother's. We had a boy and named him for water and letters both. Rill. He learned to listen with his hands first and his eyes second. When he asked where his grandmother was, I told him, north. Free. Reading. He clapped and said, so are we. Asa came to the mill one evening when the sun stood on the brink like a man thinking whether to leave or to tell one more story. He asked for me with no wine in his breath. He set his hat on the bench and sat without an invitation and looked at my hands. His hair had given up pretending it belonged to youth. Brother, he said, and the word went straight through old boards between us and into the ground, where it thumped once like a buried apple falling from a cart. Brother, I said back, and it did not break me to say it. He gave me a paper. Not a ledger. A letter, written in a hand that had learned to be plain. Quillen. I am leaving this place. I am going where the city will let a man keep his head down and his hands busy. I am not good and do not pretend. But I am less what I was and will try to be more what a man is. If you can find a use for any land with my name on it still, use it. There is a small field near the willow cut. Keep it for boys who need to practice walking at night without fear. Will you bless me? He asked, half a smile, half the boy who had not been allowed to exist. We are not priests. We are men with hands that know wood and water. I put my palm on his shoulder and felt the same heart in there that had jumped under my fingers the night the leather learned him. I will bless your leaving, I said. I will bless your late beginning. I will not bless what you were, but I will not curse you for having been it. He nodded. That is more than I hoped. He stood. Do you still hear the wheel sing? Every day, I said. Sometimes it sings a morning song. Mostly it sings a working one. He lifted his hat. Work, he said, and left it at that, which is one right thing he did. Years lay down like boards. The boy Rill grew to a man who could steer a skiff through reeds by memory and smell alone and could read a page set anywhere he chose, house, field, courthouse, train, and did. He and his mother and I painted a door red one spring because the world had named the color danger and we wanted to name it home. Men came by who had learned to nod at us without deciding what we were worth first. Women came by who had learned to carry keys in their pockets and to laugh when dogs barked, not wince. On a slow winter day, when snow shook down off a fir and made its own hush, Temperance sat by our stove with her hands open like she always kept them, as if waiting for bread the Lord might hand to her. Thee never asked why I do what I do, she said. I smiled. The river never asked me why I listen. She smiled back, the winter breaking just a little around her eyes. Then thee understands. We took the field Asa had given and set posts for boys to practice walking in dark, soft places to fall, knotted ropes to trip only men with bottles, bells to tell a man he had made noise where a dog might have listened. We let girls practice, too, and they put the boys to shame until the boys learned modesty, which is another word for a proper education. In the end, there is no end that fits in a man's mouth tidy. A river makes its own. It reaches places men draw lines to keep it from, and the lines go down under mud and are forgotten by the first spring. I stand on a bank that used to be half a yard farther out and do not mourn the inches. I count the names that fit in the space instead. If you stand where the oxbow rests its elbow on summer afternoons, you can hear children spelling their own names without fear that someone will take the letters away. You can hear an old will say what it always said, only now it says it to a world that, for the length of a breath and maybe two, believes it. And if you listen hard, if you put your head just right, like a man at a keyhole and humble enough to know the door will never quite open, you can hear a skiff nose reeds and the sound a leather strap makes when it gives, not because it was cut, but because the man who bound it learned to untie his own hands. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.